Well, I want to thank you for convening this important conversation about one of the most important qualities that the Creator gives us that makes us human. In this moment of social transformation uh, brought about, we think, brought about specifically from a virus that the great militaries of the world can't protect us against, that doesn't recognize whether you're rich, poor, Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, black, white, doesn't matter. The virus treats everybody equally. It doesn't carry a passport. It says that our future as human beings are interconnected beyond the boundaries of nations. That that addressing this challenge to the fabric of our daily lives is a global common good. You know, when Jonas Salk came up with the vaccine against polio, he didn't patent it. It became a gift of the global common good. And there's now uh, many former heads of state, leaders, Nobel Peace Laureates, led by Muhammad Yunus, who was the fellow who started the idea of microcredit, of declaring the vaccine to be a global common good. Now, what could be more in accord with conscience than an act, a principle that defines something as bringing love and compassion and addressing human suffering into action? That to me is what brings concordance in our individual lives. But he's essentially saying that the nations of the world and the scientific community have to change the way in which they view the gift of intelligence and its use. Instead of only looking at it as a market benefit, we have to look at it as a global common good. What are other global common goods? I would say peace amongst the world's religions, greater understanding and appreciation of diversity. That's a global common good. But that's something that has to come from the heart. And that's the purpose of religion. And that's the purpose of our gathering together here, which is to move the distance from the head of ideas to the open heart. And maybe we can learn something from this virus. The virus, like the eyes of my 14-month-old grandson, looks at the world without borders. It looks at the world like the astronauts taking pictures from outer space. It's a world without borders. I'm not saying we shouldn't have borders, we shouldn't have states, we shouldn't have neighborhood associations and cities and governments. These are vehicles through which we can express our values. But our values have to duplicate the reality of the unity of the planet Earth and the unity of the biological systems that make up the planet Earth, the unity of the climate of the planet Earth, the unity of the human family. When you make the distance between the head and the heart, and you follow the dictates of conscience, you end up with a heart without borders. And this is what this moment in history is telling people of conscience, of operating with what am I to learn from this moment? What can I learn? I can learn that I care about the mother in sub-Saharan Africa, dramatically affected by climate change, that has to decide which one of her children will have enough food. I have to learn from the elderly billionaire who got the virus and has to now give up all of the riches that he spent his life acquiring. And he sits there alone in fear. I have to care about that person because my heart now is moving toward a heart without borders. So this initiative that you've started of an International Day of Conscience is not an abstract lesson in a university. It's a reality of the nations of the world brought to life through our individual efforts. I'd like to tell about an instance in which I was, two instances in which I was dramatically affected by other people's statements that affected my conscience. I was a young man interning in Washington in the late 1960s. A senator from New York State named Robert Kennedy took a group of us out for lunch. And he told us what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis when the then Soviet Union and the United States came within minutes of obliterating humanity. There was the belief that the Soviet Union was deploying nuclear missiles in Cuba. It turned out, in fact, that they had already deployed dozens of operational nuclear weapons in Cuba. The Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States wanted to invade Cuba, and had they done so, those missiles would have gone off, and the entirety of humanity would have likely been obliterated in the nuclear exchange. We were only saved by good luck. And Senator Kennedy said to us, and I think there were about 6 or 7 interns at this small luncheon, he said, how we address this weapon is both the moral and practical litmus test of modernity. And that hit me at a level of conscience. What can I do in my life to obliterate this threat before it obliterates us? And then from thinking about that, I started thinking about the uses of science and technology, the uses of intelligence that we have, the uses of the state. What is real security for human beings? Can security be obtained by perfecting weapons? Or is security obtained by pursuing loving kindness and compassion? Is security obtained by dialogue, diplomacy, recognizing our common humanity? Is this new? Well, what's new is our reach in the uses of science, technology, and social organization reach into the very survival of our planet and future generations. And if that's not an issue of conscience, the very survival of everything that you hold dear, every single person you hold dear, the very future of life on the planet itself. A great Sufi poet of I think the 13th century named Sadi had a poem that sort of sums it up for me. He said, humanity is one arising from one unseen essence. An injury to one part invokes a healing response from the whole. O you who cannot feel the suffering of others, are you truly human? A loose translation. But our conscience awakens that sensitivity to our common humanity. The virus of today reminds us of our common vulnerability. It reminds us that our time here in life is not forever, and that our moments together as human beings can be enriched by bringing loving kindness and compassion into action, or degraded by forgetting our conscience. I'd like to share another example of a great person who hit my conscience. It was at a luncheon at the residence of the Holy See, the Vatican's mission to the United Nations. And there were a bunch of diplomats, and we were talking about, I'm a civil society advocate, an NGO, if you will. And we were discussing matters of importance in the United Nations system and the importance of public engagement in addressing global poverty issues, in addressing protecting the environment, and preventing the scourge of war. There was an ambassador there from Chile named Ambassador Juan Somovia, who became the president of the International Labor Organization. And he said, I believe there are many, many millions of people of good conscience with hearts of love and compassion who are in the closet, who go about their daily lives and don't let it be known how valuable these qualities are to them, who, in a sense, hide behind the social positions they have. I thought to myself, at the time I was practicing law in a distinguished law firm in Philadelphia. And I thought to myself, I'm one of those people. I'm hiding in the closet. I've got to come out. I really believe that loving kindness and compassion matter, and these principles can be brought into our institutions. They're the ought. They're the ought, and the ought is so important. When Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that was an ought. It's still an ought. When he said it, we were much farther from that than we are today. When he said it, men without property didn't have the full rights of citizenship and voting. Women didn't, and people of color were in much of the United States treated as property, a long distance from the ought that all men are created equal. But that voice of conscience has been a galvanizing power ever since. And we now know that all human lives are sacred, immeasurably valuable. And we're learning that our human lives are interconnected with all the other life forms on the planet. We're not isolated. In fact, I often think, and should be a matter of conscience, how lacking in gratitude I am for the fact that 50 to 70% of my oxygen and your oxygen comes from phytoplankton, a simple single-cell organism floating in the oceans that depends on the health of the oceans. In a sense, that's very much part of our lungs that we share. It's like the third lung. While you and I are breathing right now, we are being blessed by the generosity of phytoplankton. Are we working together now to have a governing system that is protecting the health of the oceans and protecting our common lung? This is why it's so important that the voice of conscience, informed by the qualities of loving kindness and compassion, ring out loud and clear to the world, and bring sanity to the behavior of nations. The more we make these weapons, the less security we obtain. The more we come to understand each other and appreciate each other and work for each other's benefit, the more security we obtain. So I pray today and every day that that voice of conscience guide me, be awake in me, and that I be of benefit to others, that if my heart is clear and good, only if my heart is clear and good can I really be of benefit to others. Whatever we have inside of ourselves is going to come out. So the first place in which the voice of conscience has to guide us is within ourselves. But then it must be brought into action. The fruit of bringing loving kindness into action is inner peace. That's the fruit of it. If your heart opens and you have clarity of conscience, you don't follow it, you will be discordant. If you follow it and bring loving kindness and compassion into action, then the fruit of that, the benefit of that, will be a state of peace. And the benefit of a state of peace is the capacity for wisdom. The ground for wisdom is inner peace. And wisdom is what the world needs today more than anything. So it's a process. Begins with that voice of conscience. And mine was the guidance for me in my life has been, I've named two instances, but I believe that if you make it from my experience, if one makes it their intention to become a better human being, not just get more for yourself, but to become fully human and all that's implied, the universe, because it's guided by the hand of God, will provide you lessons to ripen that pure intention. The conscience on the deeper side begins with purity of deep intention. And then in the manifestation, it goes to the very institutions that govern our lives. Our states, cities, our religious institutions, our businesses, our schools, and our families. May that hand of guidance guide our hearts and our hands to express loving kindness and compassion in justice and peace for the world. Thank you.